Hello there, little masters, and welcome back to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight the good stuff will make you feel strong enough to lay siege to Mordor for 7 years.
West to Hall, my friends. I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, the Aragorn to my Aemir, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Shawn. Well, folks, tonight we start the very last chapter of the Silmarillion, the rather obviously titled Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. Or, since we like our difficult-to-pronounce acronyms like SPBIMI here at the Prancing Pony, we'll call it Otropada.
That's difficult to pronounce indeed. I like it. If you take the whole title into consideration, we're actually back to those ofs again. Of the Rings of Power. But we could just as... Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's true. A couple of ofs. It's a two of chapter title. But, we could just as easily have said we're raising a glass of the good stuff to toast to old friends and older enemies, couldn't we? Because we're about to spend a lot more time with some guys whose names you folks already know. Elendil, Isildur, Gil-galad, and, of course, Sauron.
Well, not to mention next time we'll be reading about a little thing called a halfling. But,
that sounds interesting.
Yeah, no spoilers, though.
Well, honestly, seriously, I don't think anything in these last 20 pages is going to be a surprise to anyone. So
I hope not.
Spoil away.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I have been released from my shackles. I shall spoil. But first, Shawn,
please do.
Yeah, like a bad egg. I'll just spoil like that. But
there you go.
First, Shawn, do we have anything from Barnleman's bag today?
Yeah, first we've got one from Andreas L. in Stockholm, Sweden. He wrote in a little while ago and said, I have a question about a Calabaith that's been bothering me for so long, and I'd love your thoughts on it. Only 9 ships escaped the downfall. How many people could have been on all those ships? Surely the Númenórean ships exceeded even the largest sail ships we ever had during the 19th century, but still, in the last alliance, there was supposed to be an enormous army of Dúnedain. Absolutely, there were many of the faithful living along the shores of Middle-earth who had moved there during the last centuries before the downfall, but how could there have been an army of over, say, 20,000 Númenóreans? I just can't get the maths to fit together. And then he goes on to speculate that that there may have actually have had to be at least 50,000 to not had the race basically be wiped out after the whole war of the Last Alliance, the Battle of Dagorlad, the Siege of Barad-dûr, and of course the Gladden Fields. Yeah. And so he goes on to say, or say there were only 10,000 people on the ships, and after the war, maybe a quarter of that in Middle-earth. This is, in my opinion, the most likely, but there's so few left alive, especially since the Númenóreans had so few children. Have you found a source on this that I haven't that explains, how they managed to muster such a big force, and what are your thoughts on this matter? Okay. So, really good question, Andreas.
It is. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to doing some math and maybe having Alan do some math.
Is this more math? Do we have to do more math?
We have to do more math. I have seen... Math. Yeah, I have seen the speculation that I think Andreas is thinking about, that there must have been around 20,000 Dúnedain warriors. I'm not really sure where it comes from, but I have seen the number before, so, okay. Since
that's a pretty
the number
big army. I mean, it would take a lot to put on a siege around Barad-dûr, even with the elves involved. Yeah,
so it's it seems like a good enough number to work towards, so let's give it a shot.
Okay.
So here's the first thing I thought of was, remember, the last alliance did not happen immediately after the downfall. The downfall of Númenor was in 3319 of the Second Age. Right. And then the Battle of Dagorlad was in 3434. So that's 115 years between between leaving Númenor and, going to war against Sauron. Okay. So 115 years means
that's a pretty long time.
It is, and there's time for some population growth, which I think is the key here. Now, I'm obviously... and they are men, so,
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I'm no expert in the field, obviously. I'm not an expert in any field that I know of, but some quick Googling tells me that the estimated population of the world in 1900 was 1.6 billion. And today, 117 years later, it's 7.5 billion. So that is more than quadruple growth in 117 years, which is almost exactly the time span we're talking about, 115 years in Middle-earth. Now, of course, that's with modern medicine and modern agriculture, and, we can be sure that the Númenóreans who, the dregs of society that washed up on the shores of Middle-earth certainly didn't have, modern agriculture and pesticides and things like that.
Did you bring your refrigerator with you? Did you pack a hospital? Any penicillin?
Bring some, yeah, really. No kidding. So even if they had had any technology back home, they certainly didn't have it by the time they got here. But they did have long lifespans. In fact,
That's true.
Longer than anything that modern medicine can do for us. I mean, Elendil was 300 years old by the time he was killed in battle. Isildur and Anarion were over 200. So, and that was even, that was even in the waning years of the Númenóreans. So
true.
I guess kind of where I'm getting to is 115 years is time for people to reproduce. And for Númenóreans, at the end of 115 years, probably most of the original survivors were still alive.
That's true.
As opposed to, like the quadrupling or the slightly more than quadrupling we see on Earth from 1900 to, say 2015. I mean, nobody from 1900 is alive anymore. So there's been, some people dying off as well.
Yeah.
So I guess
you might be able to count survivors born in 1900 on one hand. 117. There might be 2 or 3, but certainly not certainly nobody ready for battle.
Not a significant amount. We're not dealing with an average life expectancy of a couple hundred years.
No.
So, I don't know. I guess
that makes a big difference. I think that would.
I think so. So I think population growth needs to be taken into account. But
sure.
I think you had some further math on this, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And we talked about the Númenóreans last time not having had a lot of children. That kind of like the Elves, but that was under normal circumstances. This is the last remnants of a fallen civilization. This is that deserted island, kind of scenario where they've got to repopulate. So you could yeah, exactly. You could bet they were reproducing as much as they could, sort of like little Númenórean bunnies. Isildur and Anarion.
Why the Gondorians have that winged helm? It's actually rabbit ears.
There you go. Those are rabbit ears. I love it. I absolutely love it. Going to redraw the artwork, with all those fabulous helms.
Yeah.
Isildur and Anarion each had 4 kids. And all but and 7 of those 8, all but Isildur's youngest, were of fighting age by the time we get to the Battle of Dagorlad.
That's true.
So for sake of this discussion, let's certainly accept that tripling their population was possible in 115 years. Not quadrupling. I think they would have had to have some technology that they just didn't have. But they did have that long lifespan. So really it would be the equivalent of doubling, but with all the original generation still present. So it's the equivalent of tripling. That means they would have needed to start with 7,000 or so on those 9 boats to get to 21,000. But, and this is where it gets a little harder, that's just the men of fighting age. So we'd have to account for the women and for boys, and as well as men who are too old or, who are infirm. So if we increase that, if we kind of ballpark that times 2.5 to get to 50,000, allowing for 20,000 women and 10,000
some children
boys and old men who couldn't fight, we'd have to start with 17,000.
Taking into account that, probably the Númenóreans have more years of good fighting in them than we would. Certainly relative to their lifespan.
Elendil was over 300 years old when he was killed in battle. So, it's not like they stopped fighting at 71 or something, So, I'm thinking that we'd probably need to start with about 17,000 on those 9 boats in order to get to, say 50,000 in order to have 20,000 fighting men. That would be, around 1,800 to 1,900 per boat. So that's a lot. I don't know about 18th century boats as much, but I do know that the Titanic, which of course is significantly larger, I would imagine, than anything even the Númenóreans could have produced, that carried 3,300. So I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe it is possible.
Maybe a boat half that size with half that capacity. Yeah.
Yeah. Packed in a little tighter, probably. But let's not forget this is meant to be mythology.
Exactly.
This is kind of like, it makes me think of those questions that we had about the details of agriculture, or even the size of Encaligon that we talked about recently. Some things are just going to defy real-world criteria, real-world measurements. Just wasn't the kind of realism that Tolkien was interested in. He was interested in that historic realism, that feel that you have of this being a real, genuine place, rather than those nitty-gritty details. And so there are going to be places where we just have to take things a little less literally, and unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and I think of some of like the old classical epics, or these feats of strength that supposedly ordinary men did. I don't know. I suppose there's a certain amount of exaggeration that you have to account for, but
poetic license.
Poetic license is a good way to put it. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. Whatever the numbers don't really add up, is that this is a myth.
Exactly.
But hey, at least we've got a possible path to the number. So hopefully that satisfies you, Andreas.
I hope so. Shawn, any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one more, and this one came from Keith in Oklahoma.
So there are still people in Oklahoma listening to us after my
After
horrible comment.
you
Insulted the several states.
after you managed to insult Oklahoma and several other states,
and then Texas, and then North Dakota. Yeah. that was bad.
Check our outtakes on our website, folks. If you haven't heard about this.
Or don't skip that one. You can.
It was fine. It was fine. It wasn't.
Listen
that
to the
bad.
ones where we mock Shawn. Those are so much more fun.
If I recall, Keith actually wrote in and said he thought that one was pretty funny.
Well, good. I'm glad. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate your patience.
Keith, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. I don't know, but at least one Okie wrote in to say he wasn't too offended.
Good.
But Keith actually wrote in on this one to say, this has been brewing in my head for a while. I have decided for myself, barring proof otherwise, that Narsil is in fact the sword left in Vinyamar by Turgon. I offer no proof, except that Narsil is a great heirloom of the royal line of Numenor. Okay. The sword of the kings was the sword of Thingol, Aranruth. So that would leave the sword of Tuor to pass to a lesser royal. Or maybe only the faithful put enough value in it to claim it. The fact that Telchar wrote both is, of course, a strong factor in my thoughts on this.
For myself, barring proof otherwise, is that what we call headcanon?
Probably, yeah.
I heard somebody use that phrase, and what in the world is headcanon?
I learned that word not too long ago myself. In fact, I think it might have been one of our listeners mentioned it on Facebook or something. Yeah.
I didn't know there was such a thing. I always thought it was just either canon or not. I didn't realize you could make up your own.
I think it's just a fancy word for your own interpretation of something, really.
Yeah, I think so. But it certainly is an interesting idea. The first thing that comes to mind is that Tuor, who would have picked up that sword, in the fall of Gondolin, ended up fighting with that axe, Dramborleg. And of course, he killed multiple Balrogs with it. So he didn't fight with the sword; he fought with an axe. But that axe was lost, along with a lot of the other heirloom weapons, including Aranruth, as you mentioned, in the fall of Numenor. So the sword's fate is, I guess, still in question. We don't really know.
Yeah.
I'll admit I like the speculation, but let's be honest, I also liked the speculation a couple episodes ago about Bilbo's mithril coat, and the more I think about it, the more that doesn't work either. So,
I like that one, but
I know it was such a nice idea. But is there anything that we can hang our proverbial hats on here?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think it's just pure speculation. I mean,
it's fun, though.
I'm trying to think whether Turgon actually had any dealings with dwarves of Nogrod, because that's where Telchar was from.
Well, it would have had to have been before, while they were in Vinyamar, because that's when
it would have had. It would have had to have been, because I mean,
and Gondolin doesn't accept deliveries.
Right, exactly, as we kind of were talking about recently, and I think in follow up to that question about the mithril coat. I mean, it seems to me that. Yeah, I mean, Turgon would have had to commission it directly prior to moving to Gondolin, which doesn't sound right to me because we know that Gondolin later on had such great smiths.
Right.
Glomdring and Orcrist and Sting. Some of the most famous swords of Middle Earth. So if they had that kind of smithing power later on, I would be surprised that even early on that they would be commissioning stuff from the dwarves.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's either that or. I don't know. I mean, and then there's the question of whether
have been involved somehow, since he was involved with Aranruth.
Maybe, but he would have had to have. I mean, maybe because Thingol probably did have lots of dwarven swords lying around.
Right.
I suppose. I'm
just picturing.
I mean,
which
again,
sword should I use today?
I kind of think like if it was such a special sword, for Turgon to have left it behind in Vinyamar when he left, I don't know that. That's the part that I kind of have a little trouble with.
Ulma would have had to tell him, leave this sword behind.
Leave this in. Well, that's true, and he did describe the armor.
Yeah, and the arms, but
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a fun speculation. I'm not going to say it's not possible, and I think Keith admits, there's really no proof, but it's a cool thing to think, and that's kind of the beauty of Tolkien's leaving some things, open for interpretation, is that you can fill in these little gaps if you want to. I'm not going to say it's not accurate, but
no, there's certainly no proof against it. It's conceivable. It's plausible.
And it is probably more plausible than Bilbo's mithril coat.
Yeah, it probably
once belonged to Eärendil.
Sad to say. I was thinking about that, and my first thought was, why in the world would you make a mithril coat for a little boy who's going to outgrow that thing in about 6 months? I mean,
that's true.
I keep buying shirts for my kid, and it's like 6 months later, dude, there's your belly button.
Those
time to get a new shirt.
Those Gondolindrum, they're just throwing money around. They don't.
they don't. Their economy was absolutely.
I'm loving too much the work of my hands.
Throw up the hands, wave them in the air like you just don't care. Oh, my goodness. You know,
Wow.
I'm sure their economy had to have been great because they didn't do any trading with anybody.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, the Gondolin was the ultimate.
Pure self-sufficient.
What's our trade deficit today, King? 0.
0. Are we up or down from last quarter?
None.
Same.
Yeah. N-A.
Yep.
All right. Well, before we dig into this discussion, we want to talk to you again about a little something what's coming down the road with the Prancing Pony podcast. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the Summer of the Prancing Pony and all the cool things that we have coming your way over the next few months. There was that incredible spurt of 5 straight weeks with episodes being released. We're still resting and recovering from that.
Yeah. No,
as well as our conversation with John Garth. And, of course,
that was fun.
That was so much fun. Loved having him on. I hope we get to have him on again soon.
Yep.
We're really, really close now to the end of our journey through the Silmarillion. We're going to have that special retrospective episode for you for that. And then, of course, we're going to have 2 episodes to talk about the films.
Yeah, and then after that, we've got a very full month of September coming up. Let's see what's coming up in that month.
August, folks.
yeah, no kidding. We've got, the 40th anniversary of the publication of the Silmarillion.
Yep.
Then right after that, we've got the 80th anniversary of the publication of The Hobbit. We're going to plan on doing at least one, maybe more than one Facebook Live event that month to celebrate those. And we're also expecting a very special guest. Dr. Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor himself, is going to be joining us.
Yes, he will.
And then right after we talk to him, we'll dive right into The Hobbit.
That's right. But, we also told you that we really want to bring you more content, more frequently, and we want to engage with you in ways that social media just doesn't allow. But to do that, like we talked about last time, we really are going to need your help. It's only with your support that we can do all of the things that we want to do for you. And so we've started up a Patreon campaign. Now, for those of you not familiar with Patreon, a little reminder from what we talked about last time. It's a crowdfunding site, kind of like Kickstarter, but it allows you to pledge a very small amount, just a tip really, on a monthly basis. And doing that not only lets you fund some of these really cool new opportunities, but we are going to be working on some very cool rewards for our patrons.
Yes, we are. And those of you who have listened to us for a while know that we record the show a couple of weeks in advance of the release date. So as of today, when I'm saying this, even though it's the second time we've mentioned it, we still haven't quite figured out what all the rewards are that we're going to be offering.
We're pretty close.
We're pretty close. We're narrowing that list down, but we're not quite there just yet, and we don't have the link for the Patreon campaign yet. But check back with us on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast or on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, because by the time this episode releases, by the time you hear me saying this, we'll have all that available for you.
Yes, we will.
So with all that said, what kind of exciting plans do we have that we need your help with? Well, we've narrowed it down a little bit from the last episode after doing some extensive brainstorming. Alan, you want to tell them what we've come up with by now?
Well, between us, it's probably not brainstorming. It's like brain light breezing.
It's just kind of like brain gasping for air.
There's no storm front moving in with these brains. Just like a slight breeze.
Just a.
Like Shawn said, definitely check with our social media channels. We'll also, by that point, have a video up that explains all of this. That'll give you all of the reward tiers and our goals and what we're going to be doing and things like that. But here are some of the ideas that we've narrowed it down to for now. The biggest one is one that we've had a lot of folks asking us to do for a while, and that is move to weekly episodes. Truth is, it takes a lot of time to prep, research, record, and post-process each of these episodes. We've been talking about it, and it's probably close to 8 hours per episode for each of us. So that's a big number, and to move it to weekly is a really big ask. So we're going to need your help to make that happen. One of the other things we want to do live Q&A sessions with our Patreon supporters, giving you an opportunity to connect directly with us, and then turn around and use that Q&A, as an episode or as a special, as something that we can put out on Facebook. We want to do new special episodes, maybe even a special series from time to time. And there's one other big one, hosting special events like a pub night or a live episode recording at moots and conventions near you. Yeah,
it's an exciting list, and
it is. It really is.
They are
big list.
They are big plans, and they're goals really.
Yeah,
and
they really
and
are.
we want to do it. If we do it, we want to do it right. But we are just two guys with limited time and limited resources.
Sadly, yes.
Yes. With your help, we do think we can do more for the Prancing Pony podcast community. We want to do more. And so, again, we do need your help for that. So please check our website, check our social media channels for ways that you can support the adventure. The information is up there now.
Yes.
And feel free to ask questions through our social media channels or at our email address at theprancingponypodcast@gmail.com. That's theprancingponypodcast@gmail.com.
Not a Prancing Pony podcast or some Prancing Pony podcast, but the Prancing Pony podcast at gmail.com.
Or my Prancing Pony podcast. Or
I know where you're going with that. The pony thing. We're not going there.
No, just like everything is all customized these days.
I know, it really is.
Like my this, your that.
I was thinking, what's that pony thing? That My Little Pony.
Oh, My Little Pony. Oh,
that's where I was afraid you were going with that.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, I wish I hadn't.
Now I can't stop.
I wish I hadn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, there is one more thing that we do need your help with, folks, and this is regardless of whether you want to be a part of Patreon or not. We have a survey from our podcast host that will help us to get a better idea of who our audience is. It's a real short survey. I'm talking 15, 20 seconds. But the catch is we need 250 of you to complete it for us. Now, that's like 5 times as many people as have gone onto iTunes and reviewed us. So this is a big ask of you. But we're asking you to please help us out with that. Go to survey.libsyn, that's LIBSYN.com/The Prancing Pony Podcast and fill it out. Now, we promise you this. Shawn and I are the only ones who will get your email addresses, and the demographic data is only gathered in aggregate, so your privacy is completely assured. Please help us out and complete the survey. If you missed the link, go ahead and check our show notes. We're going to post it there as well. And we might be doing something pretty cool with those email addresses, like putting them all in a hopper and seeing what cool prize might go to somebody. But
there you go.
Details on that to come. Thanks in advance. And now it is time to move on to the Third Age.
Can't believe we're finally here, and I guess we're going to spend pretty much the rest of the podcast in the Third Age, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are until we get to Unfinished Tales.
Until we get to Unfinished Tales and some of the other craziness that...
Which, I mean, when's UT going to be for us? Probably 4 years?
I don't know. Our kids will be in college, I'm sure. Not that long. Not that long. A few years, though.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to see if Patreon's compatible with Medicare and Social Security.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to go ahead and start with, well, as we've often said, the very beginning. That's a very good place to start.
Very good place to start.
Of old, there was Sauron the Maya, whom the Sindar and Beleriand named Gorthar. In the beginning of Arda, Melkor seduced him to his allegiance, and he became the greatest and most trusted of the servants of the enemy, and the most perilous, for he could assume many forms, and for long, if he willed, he could still appear noble and beautiful, so as to deceive all but the most wary. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order, and he commanded Sauron to return to Aman and there receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith, for under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eonwe departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. Really interesting.
Well, yeah, very. Very. There's a lot here about Sauron and just sort of his response to...
Yeah, and a lot more than I think we'd think there'd be, just based on looking at those two paragraphs in surface, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, we're here to crack that open, aren't we?
That is exactly it. Well, let's start with a little bit of word nerdery on Gorthar. The appendix to the Silmarillion tells us that this Sindarin name breaks down into the two elements: Gor, which means horror or dread, like Gorgoroth.
Right.
I'm sure there are others that I can't think of off the top of my head.
That's the big one that
really
comes to mind. Yeah,
and it's repeated, I guess, to be. It's really dreadful dread.
I think so. Yeah,
I think it is.
Yeah.
Or dreadful
they call
horror.
that reduplication, which is often done to
to
strengthen
emphasize
that.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
and then Thaur, which means abominable or abhorrent. Now, interestingly, Sauron comes from that same Thaur root, and it means the abhorred. And you've got more on that, don't you?
That is correct. I do, yeah. Well, because, it tells us here that of old there was Sauron the Maya. It doesn't tell us anything about, him before that. And clearly, the abhorred was not his original name when he was
Gee, thanks, Mom and Dad.
a Maya of Valley. Right. It's like, really? Did you have to name me the abhorred? Now, I bring this up because I think this is one of those
good one.
little factoids that I think a lot of people, see online. His original name is actually attested if you dig really, really deep into Tolkien's essays. And
really deep.
Yeah, exactly.
So James Earl Jones deep.
Oh, man. It is too late for me, my son.
Go ahead. I'm so sorry. I digress.
No, that's all right.
That's what we do.
I'm trying to come up with a Mufasa reference, and I can't think of one because it's been too long.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
So Sauron's original name, and you do see this mentioned online, was Mairon, Mairon, and it means admirable or excellent. It's basically the inverse of his evil name. The only source for this information, I said you have to dig deep for it. The only source is a manuscript that Tolkien wrote that was called Words, Phrases, and Passages in the Lord of the Rings. It was published in a linguistic journal called Parma El Delambaron in 2007. So this is really new information for most of us. And there's one paragraph, like 2 sentences about it, and this is all it says. It says, Sauron's original name was Mairon, but this was altered after he was suborned by Melkor. But he continued to call himself Mairon the Admirable, or Tar Mairon, King Excellent, until after the downfall of Numenor.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Isn't that great?
That's awesome.
Get a little Bill and Ted. On that.
King Excellence Adventures, dude.
Yeah, King Excellent.
Man.
I bring this up because, part of what we do is to elucidate all the information that's out there on Tolkien's work.
For those of you at my grade level, that means shine a light on. I'm just trying to help folks out, Shawn.
Thank you
and
very
your
much.
college words.
Appreciate that. I know my fancy college words. Now, I bring this all up because, Mairon is, for some reason, Mairon has sort of become a fan favorite, I think, on the internet. Don't you think? There's a lot of art, and I'll admit there's some cool art that's out there, what people think Mairon looked like. There's some fan fiction. I'm not really
started on that.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan fiction fan. I mean, hey, if you're into that, cool. It's not for me.
No.
But here's my PSA for the day. Anything you ever hear about Mairon before he was suborned, as Tolkien says, is a complete fabrication.
Right.
Tolkien didn't. There's nothing in History of Middle Earth. There's nothing even in those linguistic essays that tells us about who he was, his personality, or anything. All we have is the name and whatever you can assume about his personality from the name. So I just put that out there so people, understand that the name is out there, but don't go looking for any information about who he was
really,
before.
Unless you want to kind of make yourself look like you're trying to be elite, don't call him that, because you probably don't have a copy of Parma El Delambaron on your shelf.
Right.
You probably found out this name from somebody else who found it from somebody else who found it from somebody else in a Facebook group.
Right.
And you're trying to sound like you're some super Tolkien geek.
Yeah. And the reality is that even super Tolkien geeks, most of the super Tolkien geeks I know, don't know anything else about it besides.
There is nothing else about it.
There is nothing else. Yeah.
I think it seems to be popular amongst the folks who, and I don't know why there are people like this, who admire Sauron. The people who kind of feel like that Morgoth or Melkor
kind of an anti-hero
kind of got the shaft, and they like to blame Iluvatar for everything. It's
there's a tendency to kind of see it as kind of an anti-hero, and there's kind of like there's a very romanticized kind of attitude towards the nature of this character is kind of like, I don't know, like almost Miltonian, like, fall from grace of this character, but none of that's in Tolkien's work.
No, you're just imagining it if it's there, but it is interesting. I suppose the fact that he continued to call himself King Excellent when everybody else was calling him the Abhorred tells us quite a bit about his personality.
It probably does tell us quite a bit. Yeah.
I think he was a little narcissistic, actually.
I think so. I think
King Excellent, dude.
I'm King Excellent. You do not call me Abhorred. I am King Excellent.
That's King Excellent to you.
Or King Excellent the Admirable, if you want to reduplicate it.
There you go. Myron.
Yeah, there you go.
King Excellent the Admirable. Okay, well, that's fun.
And anyway, thank you for that sidebar.
No problem. I'm glad you told us about all that. I had frankly, well, I hadn't forgotten about Myron, but I'd just lost all interest. I do think it's interesting about this assuming many forms. You know, we see that back in the Tale of Beren and Luthien, right? When in that one fight with Huon, we saw him go from werewolf to serpent back to his own form, and then finally fled the scene as a vampire bat. So he is a shapeshifter. And that's fascinating.
Which is interesting because, I mean, you'd think that as a Maya, he should be able to change his raiment anytime he wants. But
right. Shouldn't they all be able to do that? But
right. But I guess maybe this is something that he's sunk some power into, and he's sort of kind of, I don't know, maybe gotten better at it, or I don't know. But it definitely seems to be something he's known for more than the average Ainu.
Exactly. But for a while, at least, he was able to still appear, like they said, noble and beautiful. And that's important because we will see that this chapter. Yep. And just like the other bad guys, he gets an opportunity to repent, and he, this time, repents.
Yeah.
Now, it's only out of fear, and that's why it doesn't stick, right? This isn't out of genuine regret or remorse, or
no, it's out of fear for the repercussions.
Yeah, exactly. This is the kid who says, sorry.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's not really sorry. Right. He just doesn't want to get the punishment.
Right. Well, and the proof is in the pudding, because as soon as as soon as he's presented with, okay, well, here's what you have to do. You have to go back and you have to, humble yourself before the Valar. No, that's too much.
Nope, sorry. They might make me do something. They might put me on probation, or I don't want the terms, and
Right.
But it's interesting because I remembered that Melkor once feigned even to himself at first that he wanted to do good. So here we kind of have a similar thing. He really repented at first, but only out of fear, and he goes right back to what he was going to do. But that brings me to something I wanted to bring in from letter 153 that talks about Sauron's origins, not as Myron, but as Sauron. This is letter 153, and he says that Tolkien says, Sauron was, of course, not evil in origin. He was a spirit corrupted by the prime Dark Lord, the prime subcreative rebel Morgoth. He was given an opportunity of repentance when Morgoth was overcome, but could not face the humiliation of recantation and suing for pardon. And so his temporary turn to good and benevolence ended in a greater relapse until he became the main representative of evil of later ages.
The use of that word relapse is really telling. It
is. It's very telling.
It almost suggests that evil doing was a sort of addiction for him. And since his heart wasn't in his own reformation, he backed off of it, and he just kind of went deeper than he ever had gone before, as we end up seeing, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure that there was a bit of pride there too. I mean, as we've seen so many times, there's nothing like pride to make you double down on whatever foolish thing you're doing.
Boy, that's true. And it's worth noting that the motivation for his repentance was external. We look at the motivation for repentance when somebody repents, like say Boromir, and that's not external, or Aule. Yeah. That's coming from inside. It's coming from a genuine regret for that decision. And that's what makes those choices redeemable. Yeah. When you go to that authority, Iluvatar, or in Boromir's case, even to Aragorn, and just say, look, I did the wrong thing. Please forgive me. That's genuine repentance. You're gonna see that done. So Sauron, what drove his repentance? Just fear, not in his own heart. So
yeah, that's a good point.
But we talked a lot
from
inside
about to be genuine.
Exactly, and we've talked a lot about repentance. In fact, there was a pondering I did a while back, talking about that specifically with Boromir and Saruman. But the whole idea being that Tolkien always gave his characters opportunity for repentance, and that's a theme that we've seen all through this work, and it's a theme we'll see again when we get into The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So
definitely, yeah.
Besides, I'm sure Melkor told him all about his time in Vala jail, and he had no interest in finding out.
I'm sure he had some stories. It's like, no, bro, I lifted weights and shot hoops all day.
Cigarettes were expensive, though.
I had to trade like 10 packs of cigarettes for like one Iron Crown, man. Like, And then all the jail crows came and took my bread.
Oh, the jail crows make a reappearance. Well played, sir.
Thank you.
That's phenomenal. Oh,
taking it back. I'm taking it back.
That's right. I'm owning jail crows.
I'm owning jail crows.
So we see, we're not going to read the next bit, but we do see kind of a description of this new geography, right? This would be a time where I would recommend going to Loader Project again, and this time you don't have to click on the map of Beleriand like we told you to all the time.
Yeah,
Just
this
go to
is
Maps
actually
of Middle-earth.
Finally the familiar map of Middle-earth that we grew up with in Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
So you'll see, a gap in the arid Lune. You'll see the River Lune and the Gulf of Lune. There's still a tiny little part of what was Beleriand, and it's that area west of the arid Lune. This region was exactly Lindon, ruled by Gil-galad. Okay, Gil-galad. I've heard it both ways. You say I say potato.
I always say Gil-galad.
Okay, see, I used to say Gil-galad, but I think you might be right, Gil-galad.
Yeah,
I'm sure you're probably right because after all, I'm the guy who says.
Well, don't say it.
I won't say it.
Don't even curse this podcast by saying it.
Oyo lo sé.
There you go.
And their chief city was
go into the Book of Lost Tales and pull out Tyne Gwethil.
There you go.
Avoid saying the other word.
There you go. I'm not going to say that word again. I'm just. Folks, listen to the outtakes. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
So their chief city there was Mithlond, at the Grey Havens. Elrond was there with Gil-galad, which was a nice place to hang out, apparently.
Because remember, Gil-galad is still the High King of the Noldor at this point.
Yeah, he is. And they do tell us, they remind us that the Firstborn could still go on to Eresia and to Valinor via the Straight Road. We learn a little bit more about some of the other Eldar east of Ered Luin, the Teleri survivors of Doriath and Osirian, established realms among the Sylvan Elves. Gee, can anybody
really cool.
think of one of these realms? What might one of these realms be?
I think we can. The Mirkwood Elves is one of those.
Mirkwood, yes. Mirkwood for $500, Alex. Yeah. Now, it's not Thranduil yet. These would be Thranduil's ancestors.
Right.
I hate to tell you this, but when we get to The Hobbit, we're still not going to mention Thranduil.
We are going to use the name Elven King exclusively.
Elven King. That's all he is at that point.
We're going to try to, at least.
We don't even know if he has a son.
I can't promise that I won't slip, but we're going to try and refer to him as the Elven King.
Well, I guess
hard,
if we ever...
It's hard to have it.
I know, it really is, because you do know who it is. I mean...
Yeah.
Even if Tolkien at that point wasn't entirely certain.
Right.
Because at that point, I mean, we'll get to this in The Hobbit, but at that point, I think there was a part of Tolkien that actually kind of saw him as directly descended from Thingol. Yeah.
So you mentioned Thranduil, that this is Thranduil's ancestors. Do we know when Thranduil was born? I don't know that.
I know we can find that out. I think we do. We know who his father was. We know that his father died in the Battle of the Last Alliance.
Okay.
And that Thranduil, that's when he was able to take over the Woodland Realm. I cannot remember his father's name. You'd think I would
Son
have
of
that.
Orifer.
Orifer. I knew it started with an O, and I knew it wasn't Orodreth. I just couldn't remember who it was.
One of those Oros. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so that's.
Okay, so Orifer was around at the War of Wrath, so it probably was him. So this would have been Thranduil's father.
Okay. Wow. Which means Thranduil might even have been alive.
Maybe.
Pretty incredible. Yeah.
Very interesting. Anyway, we digress.
We do. That's what we do. Let's see. Eregion. I love this place. And it is Eregion, folks. Not
Eregion.
This is not Eregion. It's Eregion.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Eregion.
Yeah, well, if you've only read The Lord of the Rings before now, you might remember it better as Holland. That's sort of a translation of the Elvish name Eregion, which means land of holly. It is the only lasting realm of the Noldor east of the Ered Luin.
That's right.
And I want to talk about it a little bit, especially because we had a request from a listener, Ryan in Wisconsin, who managed to be lucky enough to get this email to us right before we recorded this.
Oh my goodness! Perfect timing.
Yeah, it was perfect timing for him. So Ryan, I'll do a little bit on Eregion for you. He said that it's a fascinating concept, but he can't really find much on it. And the truth is, there's really not much written on it.
No.
There's a little bit in Unfinished Tales, which I think we'll pull from a little bit. Unfortunately, it's in the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, which is always just a monster to deal with because
really
there's so many contradictions
and the contradictions in particular are troubling.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll kind of talk about what what we think we know with some certainty, and at least what doesn't conflict with what's in Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And I'm looking at the appendices when I say Lord of the Rings. So it was founded or in 750 of the Second Age, and possibly founded by Galadriel and Celeborn.
Okay.
This is one of those things that there's multiple versions of in that story, and we don't really know where Tolkien ultimately landed on it. In the Lord of the Rings appendices, it only says that Celebrimbor was the Lord of Eregion.
Okay.
And frankly, between you and me, I mean, the story would basically be that Galadriel and Celeborn founded Eregion, stayed there for a while, and then moved on to Lothlorien, which I don't know.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like them to me.
The
They're
grass
kind of
always seems greener on the other side of the mountains. I don't know.
Could be. I don't know. I just, they stay in Lothlorien for so long. I just don't see him. I don't see him getting the rambling man lust, after a few hundred years in Eregion. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, because that awkward bit with Celebrimbor's all over now that Celebrimbor's a pincushion.
Well, spoilers, man. Come on.
You're right. At any rate, so sorry.
It was clearly founded by.
You told me I could spoil things. You said spoil away. I was my shackles.
I was talking about a halfling takes the ring and throws it in the volcano. That's what I was talking.
Yeah. Don't spoil that. We're not going to get there for like 2.5 years.
Oops. Sorry, folks.
So sorry. We digress. Go ahead.
We're not really digressing there. We're just kind of skipping ahead.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was clearly founded by Noldor, whichever Noldor it was, whether it was Galadriel or whether it was Celebrimbor or some, it probably would have been Celebrimbor if not them, because he was a pretty senior elf. He was the grandson of Feanor,
right? Son of Curufin, right?
Yeah. So at any rate, Noldor moving east across the Ered Luin into Eriador after the fall of Beleriand. It also seems, I thought this was very interesting, that it looks like it was intentionally situated to be close to Khazad-dûm, because it was, the Noldor being, disciples of Aule. They're really into crafting and smithing and things like that. It sounds like they set it up because they wanted to have commerce and trade wisdom and lore with the dwarves. So that is why it is so close to Khazad-dûm.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Khazad-dûm. I said Khazad-dûm, but it's Khazad-dûm.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is just another example of how rare this sort of thing was. I mean, the fact that they did have this friendship really tells us how that didn't exist anyplace else.
Yeah.
That elves and dwarves didn't typically get along. This was notable because of its nature as an exception.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It was definitely a rare occurrence that there would be this much friendship and this much trade between them.
But it does make sense. It was with the Noldor because of their love of craft.
If anybody.
I mean, they were close.
And Aule, of course.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the dwarves just wanting to learn about, their creator from the Noldor who had actually
seen him and talked
had dinner with him, Yeah. But
no wonder they felt superior to the Naugrim. I sat down and had dinner with your maker.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I've hung out with your guy.
That's a good point. And you're like many generations,
right?
Down from the 7 fathers who Aule created. That's really interesting. While we're on that note, I think I might have talked about this one before. I can't remember, but the word Hadhadrand.
I think we did. Yeah, I think we probably talked about it a little bit back when we were talking about when the dwarves kind of showed up. Yeah.
So maybe I've talked about it a little bit, but I'll repeat myself just really briefly because I just love this word Hadhadrand. That's one of the names that the elves gave to Khazad-dûm before they called it Moria. So Hadhadrand actually is Sindarin for basically dwarf excavation or dwarf hall. It comes from the roots of Hadad, which means dwarf, and then Rand, which means roof or hall. And so it really is basically just a translation of Khazad-dûm, which means, like dwarf delving or dwarf cave, dwarf excavation, something like that.
Okay.
Similar to, there's actually a word that Gandalf uses, I think, called Dwaradelf in Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, he does.
Same thing, dwarf delving. It's just a translation of that.
Okay.
What I love about this, though, is this word Hadad is, according to the Silmarillion appendix, is a rendering of Khazad into Sindarin sounds.
Oh.
So the dwarves call themselves, the dwarves call themselves Khazad. Sindarin hears that, or the Sindar hear that, and Sindarin doesn't have a Z. They don't have that aspirated K sound. Remember way back when we got an email from Dwaro Scholar on pronunciation of
Yeah,
Khazad.
of the Khazad, right.
And so basically they take that name and they try to pronounce it in their own sounds, and they come up with something that sounds like Hadad.
So the Z turns into that sort of that DH softened the.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
and the aspirated K turns into an H.
Because at least you still get that breath sound, that Hadad.
Right.
Right.
That's true. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
fascinating.
I know, it's really cool, and it's a really neat illustration of the difference between the sounds of the languages.
Yeah.
Got something funny to say about it too, which is,
Of course.
as I was researching it, I was looking in the War of the Jewels, which is History of Middle-earth, Volume 11, and Tolkien had a little bit to say about it here. He said, the name in the plural that the dwarves gave to themselves was Khazad, and this the Sindar rendered as they might in terms of their own speech, Hadad. Hadadrim was the name which they continued to use in actual intercourse with the dwarves, but among themselves, they referred to the dwarves usually as the Naugrim, the stunted folk. So they're really nice to their faces and try to pronounce their own name for themselves.
Oh, that is comic. That is
But
really.
yeah, but as soon as they go back home, they're like,
Those
well, the
stunted
stunted folk are gone.
So glad those stinky stunted folk are gone.
I know. So it's like, as you're talking about, like, oh yeah, they must have thought themselves superior. Well, there you go.
There you go. They really are.
Oh, those stunted folk.
Crazy. Well, we touched on Celebrimbor, and there was something, you talked about unfinished tales. There was a line in there that I wanted to pull out, and it was the only place I could find a spot to insert it, was that he desired in his heart to rival the skill and fame of Feanor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
Ooh. Hopefully he didn't have anything else to do with Feanor.
I know. Yeah, definitely wanted to follow in Granddaddy's footsteps.
Yeah.
Certainly his ambition. I mean, I think we do see he doesn't have some of his lesser qualities. I'm not going full Kylo Ren on this one, but he probably had it in him somewhere if he hadn't made some better choices in life.
Well, and he had the bad luck to be the son of perhaps the nastiest of Feanor's sons. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
He really had a rough upbringing. Dad and Granddad were total jerks.
Yeah, that's true. Curufin and Celegorm really were the two worst, weren't they?
Yeah, the seas were just awful.
I remember thinking Caranthir was really bad, and then no, actually, he's still pretty bad, but he gets a little bit better as time goes on. Those two,
yeah, terrible, terrible, terrible folk. Well, now that we've kind of talked a little bit about them, we should mention real quick, because we'll get this word again later. I love this phrase that in Eregion, the craftsmen were called the Gwaith y Myrdain, the people of the jewels.
Oh, yeah. That's a cool one. Yeah.
Love that phrase, the Gwaith y Myrdain. So we're going to find out a little bit more about them later. But for now, the Dark Ages have come. Shawn, tell us about the Dark Ages.
I've got kind of a long passage here, so bear with me.
It's all right. I think we can handle it.
All right. I'll do my best here. Elsewhere in Middle-earth, there was peace for many years, yet the lands were for the most part savage and desolate, save only where the people of Beleriand came. Many elves dwelt there indeed, as they had dwelt through the countless years, wandering free in the wide lands far from the sea. But they were Avari, to whom the deeds of Beleriand were but a rumor, and Valinor only a distant name. And in the south and in the further east men multiplied, and most of them turned to evil, for Sauron was at work. Seeing the desolation of the world, Sauron said in his heart that the Valar, having overthrown Morgoth, had again forgotten Middle-earth, and his pride grew apace. He looked with hatred on the Eldar, and he feared the men of Numenor who came back at whiles in their ships to the shores of Middle-earth. But for long he dissembled his mind, and concealed the dark designs that he shaped in his heart. Men he found the easiest to sway of all the peoples of the earth, but long he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power. And he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still that of one both fair and wise. Only to Lindon he did not come, for Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming. And though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit him to that land. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly, and few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon bidding them beware. For Sauron took to himself the name of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship.
So apparently, Gil-galad now takes on the current role of
Melian.
Melian.
He's the new
Nobody
Melian.
listens to Gil-galad. To
Yep.
Gil-galad.
Yep.
Oh, man. Come on, people. Don't
Well,
you
you know,
remember
it's-
what happened with Morgoth in Valinor? Where
You
it
know,
was the
it's-
same kind of thing. Profit from his friendship. Blah, blah, blah. Kill you. Blah,
You
blah.
know, you would think that they should have known better, but when you think about it, how many of them had ever had any kind of interaction with Sauron?
That's
how many
true.
of them even knew who he was?
Yeah, from that generation who were still alive. None.
Yeah, I mean,
None.
the only people we know of to have actually, met Sauron and faced off against Sauron would have been, Finrod.
Dead.
He's gone. All of his people that were with him gone.
Yeah.
Beren and Luthien, and that's really
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So who's left to recognize him if even he's in a
I'm not
shape
even
that
thinking
he can be
he's-
recognized in?
I'm not thinking of his. Yeah, that's true.
You're
He's
just thinking of like it's
evil.
It's too good to be true.
It's
It
too
just
good to
sounds
be
too
true,
good
which
to be
is
true.
what Morgoth
Yeah.
did in Valinor after he was
Yeah.
unfettered.
Yeah,
But,
no,
you know.
you do have a point there. I think it's worth noting that it's not like they recognize this
Well,
guy. It's
no,
not like
it's
they
not
knew
like
who
said,
he was.
oh well, it's Sauron, but he's being really nice.
Sauron's. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like, oh, Sauron, he's all better now. Like,
Sauron, he's our man.
right. He can't do it. Great.
Great. For those of you, that's an Aladdin reference. For those of
Yes.
you paying attention,
Yes.
love that. Robin Williams may have been at his finest when it comes to.
Absolutely.
Oh
Yeah.
man, the ad libs in that film are
Fantastic.
absolutely fantastic.
Just-
And there is nothing, by the way, quite like hearing your 5-year-old wake up in the morning when you say to him, "How do you feel this morning?" He says, 10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck.
Such a crick in the neck. That's awesome.
Oh, it is
I love that.
hilarious. That kid, man. Okay, so we've got, there's something I wanted to point out here. Sauron feared the Númenóreans, so he looked with hatred on the Eldar and feared the men. Does that sound familiar? Fear
I
and
feel
hate.
like I've heard some of these words before. Let's see.
It's kind of like he's
Sounds
just
like the,
covering Morgoth's greatest hits.
Yeah. Morgoth's greatest hits.
And his pride, too.
well, and his pride, too. His pride
Yeah.
grew apace. Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, there's so much of that phrase sounds like Melkor,
Yeah.
that he dissembled his mind and concealed the dark designs.
Well, you're not kidding
that was
about that one.
exactly
Yeah.
when he saw the Silmarils, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
That he
Yeah.
dissembled his purposes.
Right.
So he can easily sway the men. That's not surprising.
Not
you know.
surprising at all.
But the elves, he knows that's where the power is. My
And he
goodness.
and he goes straight for them, and
Mhm.
and as you said, there's only a couple that know that know better, that can just kind of
Yeah.
see through the lies.
Yeah.
Gil-galad and Elrond.
And it's interesting that they send messages to the others, and the messages are ignored because these people are getting much profit from his friendship. The
Yeah.
profit seems to override wisdom in this case.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that is the Noldor
Well,
in many ways.
it's hard to. I mean, it's hard to. I don't know. I guess it's kind of hard to take a step back when things seem so good, seem so fair.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Then again, you'd think that what is it? A servant of the enemy would look
yes,
fairer and
would
feel
look fair
fouler.
and feel foul. Yes, I love that line. Can't wait till we get to that.
Oh yeah, it'll be a while.
It will. That's fellowship, so it's going to be a bit.
I think it's interesting, the lies that I haven't read it yet, but kind of
No.
getting into the next passage. These lies that he uses to sway the elves.
Mm-hmm.
He basically kind of tells the elves, you listen to me, and I can help you make Middle Earth as fair as Tolaresia, or as fair as Valinor, even. It's an interesting comparison to, we just went through the Akalabath. If you look at the lies that he used to sway the Númenóreans centuries later, basically
Yeah.
live forever.
Right.
It's very revealing in regards to the primary temptations of the two races, isn't it?
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, he knows their weak spots,
Yes,
and he goes
exactly.
right after them. He's certainly smart. I mean,
Yes, he knows how to get to them, and I think it's also very interesting when you see the temptations that the Rings of Power end up having over
exactly.
the races, which we'll get to in a few pages here.
Yes, we will.
They go right to the heart of these chief temptations.
Yeah, the for men the immortality, and for elves this kind of preservation or restoration. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Exactly.
Good stuff.
He also has this line here about that he says to the Avari about the referring to the elven kindreds that are untaught. They're wandering here untaught, as if they've been abandoned by the Valar in some way. But
Oh yeah,
remember way back when the Avari were invited to go.
That's true.
Nobody was left alone. I mean, the Avari and the Teleri who chose to stay behind chose to stay behind.
That's true.
And the Noldor who were there chose to go into exile. So again, he's using these lies that sort of kind of flatter them. Yeah, a little bit of the truth, but really kind of flattering them, allowing them to see themselves in a superior light.
Exactly.
And that's what kind of gets under their skin.
Boy, it sure does, especially the Noldor.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I'm going to go ahead and read the next little paragraph. I think that'll tell us more about that.
All right.
It was in Eregion that the counsels of Sauron were most gladly received, for in that land the Noldor desired ever to increase the skill and subtlety of their works. Moreover, they were not at peace in their hearts, since they had refused to return into the West, and they desired both to stay in Middle-earth, which indeed they loved, and yet to enjoy the bliss of those that had departed. Therefore they hearkened to Sauron, and they learned of him many things, for his knowledge was great. In those days the smith of Osten-Ethil surpassed all that they had contrived before, and they took thought, and they made rings of power. But Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance.
Man,
Yeah.
One of the things that just jumped out at me this is that they desired both to stay in Middle Earth and also to enjoy the bliss of those that had departed.
Yep.
They want it both ways.
Yeah, just like the men in Akalabath last chapter.
Just like the men in Akalabath. They want to have their,
Yeah,
I hate this cliche, but they wanted to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
They wanted to have everything, and it's like no.
I want it all, and I want it now.
Ooh, very well done. It ain't much I'm asking if you want the truth.
Oh, goodness, folks. Queen reference right there.
Queen reference. That's our first one in a few episodes.
I think we referenced Who Wants to Live Forever, actually, just a couple episodes ago, probably. In
Did
the
we?
first half of the Akalabath.
We probably did.
That would be the right time to do it.
That sounds like us. Yeah.
We probably should have included something about, a severed head was found in the from the beginning of Highlander. I can't remember the exact line.
Yeah.
Oh, that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It's been way too long since I've seen that movie. Well,
Man,
I don't want to digress, but I am going to go
ages.
watch that movie soon.
Yeah, don't watch any of the others. Just don't.
I think I made it.
Save yourselves.
The second one. Yeah, the second one I think I watched once, and I was like, nope, I'm not watching anymore after this.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the first one, but man,
fantastic.
That was, I probably haven't seen it in 25 years.
Clancy Brown, the Kurgan. Oh,
the
man.
Kurgan.
That dude.
It also left the man's decapitated body lying on the floor next to his own severed head.
Did you look it up while we're talking?
Yes, I did.
Oh. Alan's Google skills have finally reached next level.
Yeah, well,
Google and talk at the same time.
Man, I just remember he's driving in some, was it a Corvette or a Camaro or something? He's like cruising on that bridge, and yeah, it's
something like that.
Yeah, good stuff, man.
Man,
it's been so long since I've seen that. So long. I mean, I've been married it'll be 25 years in September, and I haven't seen it since I've been married. That tells you something.
What? Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's not the kind of thing that she's a fan of.
My wife and I watched it a few years ago, probably less than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But probably maybe 5 years ago. Maybe longer than that. Too long. Need more MacLeod in my life. Anyway.
More Connor MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod.
Mm-hmm.
Love that stuff.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, since nobody's going to be lopping Sauron's head off, unfortunately, in this episode.
Nope.
He'll
get something cut off before we're done.
Yes, but not the head. Yes. Let's see. So, that now that I'm trying to get back on track, because somebody's got to reel us in. Otherwise we're going to sit here and talk about Highlander, and then it's going to be Sean Connery, and then we're going to be talking about James Bond after that, and it's going to all go right downhill.
Are you sure you want to be reeled back in, or are you really saying?
No, I really am saying.
Or are you really saying? Don't stop me now.
It's a plea for help, Sean. It's a plea for help. Help me.
Are you sure?
No. This passage about Osten-Ethil and the Smiths, and the fact that they Learned of him for his knowledge was great. It made me pull up something from letter 153, which I'd cited earlier. This is just later in the letter. He's talking about the Noldor, and he says that the particular branch of the High Elves concerned, the Noldor or lore masters, were always on the side of science and technology, as we should call it. They wanted to have the knowledge that Sauron genuinely had, and those of Eregion refused the warnings of Gil-galad and Elrond. The particular desire of the Eregion elves, an allegory, if you like, of a love of machinery and technical devices, is also symbolized by their special friendship with the dwarves of Moria.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't it?
So they were more, probably even more science and technology oriented than most of the Noldor. The Noldor are always about craft. They're always about artifice, subcreation. But
exactly. But
the elves of Eregion were really about scientific and technological progress.
A love of machinery and technical devices. I mean, we know how Tolkien felt about machine. I mean, that's true. We talked about machine and fall and mortality being the three main themes.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And we see how, nowhere is that more clear than in like the Lord of the Rings, where we see, the machine as an instrument of corruption and evil.
That very clear.
Yeah. I mean, and I wouldn't say it's always outright evil, but I think it is always it's an easy path to temptation.
Yeah, it is.
Interesting that they mentioned the special friendship, because of course you know what that makes me think of.
Yes.
There's
the doors of Holland.
That's right, the western door into Moria, going back to Fellowship of the Ring. Remember the password, the Sindarin word for friend was Melon. And if you recall, so here's a little bit of context for folks who haven't read this before. That door, actually, it was, if you recall, the inscription said that the door was made by the dwarf named Narvi, but that Celebrimbor actually wrote the inscription. He actually wrote the Ethildine letters that only shone in the moonlight. Those were actually written by Celebrimbor. And he wrote that Sindarin phrase that I think I'm about to butcher here, which is Im Narvi Hainechant, Celebrimbor Eregion Tetanti Thiuhin.
Actually, I think you did pretty well.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I practiced
in particular was one that I was like, wow, that's going to throw me for a loop. Better you than me.
Yeah. Yeah. I practiced it in the mirror a couple of times. I Narvi made these doors. Celebrimbor of Holland, Celebrimbor of Eregion drew these signs. My goodness. That's on page 298 of our edition of Fellowship of the Ring, where of course, the beautiful door that everybody knows. So that's these elves that we're talking about.
My goodness. But now we get the rings, don't we? I mean, this is moving fast now. So let's go ahead and pick up the next paragraph, because now we get to the heart of this section of the story.
Yep. Now the elves made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring, for the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency. And Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow. And while he wore the one ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them.
Now that's a power.
That is a power, governing the thoughts.
But governing the very thoughts. Oh.
Seeing their thoughts is big enough. I mean, despite, there's definitely some elvish telepathy that takes place throughout some of the deeper writings in Middle-earth, and we see a little bit of it in some of the books.
Even at the end of Return of the King, when
that's true. Yeah, when the remains of the White Council are communicating
in silence.
But that's always voluntary. It only, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with the Palantiri, won't we?
That's true too.
That you can let somebody in, you can communicate with somebody with your mind, but they can't break into your mind.
No. Unless you're Sauron wearing the one ring.
Unless you're Sauron wearing the one ring. Here he can actually see into your mind and actually govern the thoughts.
This is a whole lot better than being invisible. I mean, that's a pretty cool trick if you can do it. That's a parlor trick. But actually governing the very thoughts of those that wear them, making them your puppets.
That's a very good point. And think about how the ring grants power according to, the stature of those that wear it.
Exactly.
That's true hobbits turn invisible. They're small people. They have small small ambitions. Sauron has very great ambitions, and so he has very great, horrible power.
Mm-hmm. Part of this passage that you read reminded me of this text from the Shadow of the Past, which again we'll get to in a year or two. Gandalf's telling Frodo that he only needs the one, for he made that ring himself. It is his, and he let a great part of his own former power pass into it so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, wherever they be, even the three, and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and he will be stronger than ever. So we do see a reminder of that strength and the fact that, he poured all his strength into this one. And that makes sense because the elven rings were powerful, so he had to make something that was more powerful.
He had to make something more powerful to control them. Yeah.
You can't make a leash for a big dog out of dental floss, I mean, it's got to be surpassing potency. There's a visual right there.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome.
But, now let's go ahead and get to the three. We're going to keep moving because I don't want us to end up at, 3.5 hours by the end of this episode.
Talking about stuff that people that just kind of already know.
Yeah, exactly. This may seem familiar to you.
Yeah. All right, good.
But the elves were not so lightly to be caught. As soon as Sauron set the one ring upon his finger, they were aware of him, and they knew him and perceived that he would be master of them and of all that they wrought. That in anger and fear they took off their rings. But he, finding that he was betrayed and that the elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath, and he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him, since the elven smiths could not have attained to their making without his lore and counsel. But the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved and bore them away and hid them. Now these were the 3 that had last been made, and they possessed the greatest powers. Narya, Nenya, and Vilya they were named, the rings of fire, and of water, and of air, set with ruby, and adamant, and sapphire. And of all the elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess them, for those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time, and postpone the weariness of the world. But Sauron could not discover them, for they were given into the hands of the wise, who concealed them, and never again used them openly while Sauron kept the ruling ring. Therefore the 3 remained unsullied, for they were forged by Celebrimbor alone, and the hand of Sauron had never touched them. Yet they also were subject to the one.
So they were unsullied, but they were still subject to that power. Because of course he made the one ring
more powerful, right?
Yeah, more powerful. Yeah. So I think it's. Well, is this the point where we want to kind of break down like the characteristics of the
really have
rings?
to because we get a ton of rings, but we understand there's a lot of elven rings. I mean, Sauron. This says of all the elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess them. So there are others there.
Well, and so I'm unclear on that passage whether he's just saying that basically. I mean, okay, we know of 20 rings from the ring verse in the book, right?
Well, yeah.
So there's 19 plus the one. Were there more than those 19 at one point, or when they say there were many rings, is it just those 19? Because they weren't. It's not like they were made. Celebrimbor did not make 3 for elves and 7 for dwarves and 9 for men. He just made 19 rings.
He just made all those rings, right?
And it just happened to be
the 3
that
greatest were the last.
The last 3 were the most powerful, and those are the ones that ended up going to the elves. But I'm confused on whether there were more than 19 or were more than 20 rings at one point, or whether.
I believe at one point Gandalf is talking about lesser rings and then rings of power. So I think there may only be the 20 rings of power.
Okay.
Right? I mean, that may be the case. But there's a passage where he's talking about the fact that the rings of power are really, really strong. Even the lesser rings would be dangerous. I'm trying to remember the exact phrase.
I can't remember the exact phrase, but I can kind of remember.
Here you
go.
In Eregion long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings as you call them, and they were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still, to my mind, dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. Okay. So I think that's, when we're talking about the rings of power, we're talking about 20.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. And I felt like there were more rings,
Yeah.
And I'm probably just thinking of that passage. That passage is buried somewhere deep in my mind, though I can't.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't remember.
Because that passage you probably read 18,000
Yeah,
times.
exactly.
It's
Right.
Fellowship of the Ring, and one of the best chapters, too.
Right. But here I'm sitting here trying to, as I'm preparing for this discussion, I'm thinking, I'm trying to find, anything concrete that says how many, or if there were more than 20 rings. And so I think that's all it is. So the rings of power were the 20 that we get in the verse.
Right.
The 3, the 7, the 9, the 1. But again, they were not made to be delivered to specific races.
That's correct. And that's really
19
important
rings
to
of
remember.
power, and then,
Because the movie makes it seem like that's how they were made.
That's a good point. Yeah, because the way it's kind of shown in the prologue,
the visual, right? Exactly. I mean, even though Galadriel is just reading the words of the inscription, really, or not the inscription, but the kind of the history about the rings, it does seem to kind of convey this idea that they were made for, but they weren't.
Yeah,
they were just made.
Right.
So
good clarification.
They could ward off the decays of time. These 3. That you had a quote on that again, it's probably one of my favorites from the letters, right?
Oh yeah. It's well, Tolkien speaks in one of the letters, and I think it's letter 181. And he speaks to the elvish desire to arrest change and to keep things always fresh and fair. He talks about the fact that the elves are kind of like a person who would hate a very long book still going on and wish to settle down in a favorite chapter.
Yeah, man, I love that turn of phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, it's such a great turn of phrase. And yeah, it's this desire to just kind of keep things the way they always were. Remember the elves are going to be alive for as long as art is alive, and they're going to gradually regret the past, and they're going to want to,
which is why Sauron tempts them with getting things back to Valinor, or at least to Eregion.
Exactly. Right.
And
so this ends up being the power of the rings. Yeah.
Exactly. I mentioned earlier that the line was that the rings were unsullied. Tolkien actually mentions that in that letter. He specifically says that these 3 rings, were unsullied because this object, this desire to preserve, was in limited way good, and because the elves didn't desire to dominate other wills. So, at least it's not as bad as, right? But it's still a problem. And in this case, it's just a weakness. And that Sauron's
that's a good way
to capitalize.
That's a good way of putting it. It's more a weakness than it is like a corruption, a moral corruption.
Exactly. It's less a flaw and more of a weakness.
Yeah. Very cool.
So apparently this is when Sauron puts on the 1. This must be when they finally realized that Anatar was Sauron. That must be the moment when they realized, oh man, we have been had.
Yeah.
Boy.
Man, can you imagine? Can you imagine that feeling?
The feeling of betrayal and like, what did I do?
Yeah.
Man, just instant regret. And we'll get more of that when we dive into some of the Unfinished Tales bits. But first, I think, let's see, what do we have here?
Let's see.
Actually, I guess we are going to kind of start looking at that, aren't we?
Yeah, because Sauron is going to go to war.
We want to do that before we get into the Dwarves for the Rings.
Yeah. So there's kind of an escalation of force here. I see.
Yeah, there is.
In Sauron. He starts out seducing them, persuading them. Then he puts on the ring and he's trying to dominate their wills. And then when all else fails, just brute force.
Just bring the orcs about and let's
and make war on Eregion, and Eregion is laid waste.
Yeah, we only get that, right? We get Eregion was laid waste, Celebrimbor slain, the doors of Moria were shut.
We don't get the brutal, ugly story of how Celebrimbor was slain.
Oh my goodness, no, we don't. It's pretty bad. We do get. I'm going to kind of bring in some things from Unfinished Tales. This is also from the history of Galadriel and Celeborn, but this particular portion doesn't have multiple versions or any conflict. So this is this is pretty consistent.
This is pretty clear. Yeah.
Yeah, this really does seem to be exactly what happened. It's just that we get more detail in that version of the story. First, we get that the narrative tells us that they should have destroyed the 3, but that they failed to find the strength. Now.
Oh yeah.
And we're talking about some of the greatest of the elves at this point. Galadriel's there. Celebrimbor. No, Celebrimbor's not there yet. Yeah. He'd gone.
Yeah.
In fact, he'd gone.
Yeah.
Because then he went back, and he probably shouldn't have gone back.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Círdan, Gil-galad. I mean, these are like the the elite. Aren't
this
they?
is the top of the top, and they failed to find the strength to destroy them. So Galadriel says they got to hide them, disperse, never use them. She gets Nenya at that point. And at that time, Narya and Vilya go to Lindon, to Gil-galad, who we know later on gives Narya, that's the one, the ruby one, the fire one.
Right.
He gives that one to Círdan, who then later gives it to Gandalf when he shows up.
Right.
Vilya's ultimate destination actually is Elrond. So
and Gil-galad actually wore that one himself for a while before he gave it to Elrond.
Before he gave it to Elrond, that's correct.
Yeah.
So Sauron attacks. Gil-galad sends a force under Elrond. Celebrimbor, well, let's just read what happens here.
Please do.
At last the attackers broke into Eregion with ruin and devastation and captured the chief object of Sauron's assault, the house of the Myrdain, where were their smithies and their treasures. Celebrimbor, desperate, himself withstood Sauron on the steps of the great door of the Myrdain, but he was grappled and taken captive, and the house was ransacked. There Sauron took the 9 rings and other lesser works of the Myrdain, but the 7 and the 3 he could not find. Then Celebrimbor was put to torment, and Sauron learned from him where the 7 were bestowed. This Celebrimbor revealed, because neither the 7 nor the 9 did he value as he valued the 3. The 7 and the 9 were made with Sauron's aid, whereas the 3 were made by Celebrimbor alone, with a different power and purpose.
Man.
Go on.
Probably just to talk about Celebrimbor's fate.
Yeah, let's just be clear about what happens to the poor guy. Hold on, let me...
I've got it right here.
Do you? Okay, why don't you go ahead and share the pleasant bits.
In black anger, he turned back to battle. This is Sauron. And bearing as a banner, Celebrimbor's body hung upon a pole, shot through with orc arrows. He turned upon the forces of Elrond.
Yeah. You know, it's one thing to, take the flag of your opponent and, burn the flag or stomp on it in the mud, like they did with Fingon, where, it was mixed with the mire of his blood. It's another thing to take the body of your opponent, riddled with holes, and attach it to the banner of your flagpole.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
just
nasty. That's gruesome. I mean, that is just gruesome.
That's right up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is bad stuff. Bad, Sauron. Bad. Just in case you forgot whether he's good or bad. Those people that keep calling him Myron and talking about how good he is.
With his pretty red hair. I can't remember what... Yeah, I'll digress.
Let's not go there.
There is a thing about red hair. I can't remember where it comes from, though.
Where? I don't remember. There's no evidence for that.
No, I don't think there's any evidence for it.
It's an interesting world.
Yep.
So
let's see what happened. Elrond would have lost, wouldn't he?
Yeah, Elrond would have lost.
But then, who showed up?
Dum-ba-bum.
Durin sent out a force of dwarves from Khazad-dûm.
Yep. Yeah.
And elves of Lorinand, which was what would become Lothlorien. Yeah.
Right. And that makes sense. They would travel through Moria to get there.
True.
So they, basically put the pincher move on Sauron's forces, and then when Sauron turned on the dwarves, they turn around, go back into Moria, and close the doors, and he can't get in.
Yeah.
So Elrond escapes. It's at this time that he founds Imladris. So, Númenóreans arrive as well. They help defend the Grey Havens just in time to keep them from getting wiped out by Sauron's forces. And they also had a pincher move. They had also landed, some of their men had landed to the south, and so they came up and caught them in the vice and pretty much took out the rest of what was left of Sauron's forces, who, with nothing more than a bodyguard, had to retreat to Mordor. And he was mad at Númenor. Boy, was he mad. So keep that in mind, because remember, this is before...
This is all before the Akalabeth, right?
Yeah,
So this is probably the event that sort of sowed the seeds of his wanting to get vengeance on the Númenóreans.
Absolutely, it is. And we learn that. But in the meantime, Celebrimbor, did give up some information under torture, like where the 7 could be found.
Yep.
So he gets the 7. What happens then?
All right. Sauron takes them, and 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to men he gave 9. For men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will. And all those rings that he governed he perverted, the more easily since he had a part in their making. And they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. The dwarves indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom. nor can they be turned to shadows. They used their rings only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and an overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring, but all those hordes long ago were plundered, and the dragons devoured them. And of the 7 rings, some were consumed in fire, and some Sauron recovered.
And we learn exactly how many. I believe at the Council of Elrond, I think we learned that 4.
Was it 4 had been lost or 4 had been recovered?
I know, now I don't remember. Yeah, it was either 4 had been recovered and 3 lost, or 3 recovered and 4 lost. But it's interesting, they weren't made for the dwarves. It's just, or for the men. They were, I've got 16 rings here. What should I do?
Right. And I think that's interesting because, it's because of the fact that there's 7 for the dwarves. I think we tend to assume that those 7 rings were given to the 7 dwarf kings,
or the leader, each of the clans, right?
The leaders of the clans, not whoever was the leader of each of those 7 clans. We're not really sure about that. It is said that the foundation of each of their 7 hordes was a golden ring, but we don't know for sure that it was these exactly. It's kind of squishy.
It is. But we tend to like those things when it says it is said. We tend to believe those.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. But I think it could have also just as easily been symbolic. 7 is a number of significance for the dwarves, just the way 3 is a number of significance for the elves. But
True.
The 3 elven rings were not given.
Right,
exactly. They were. It's not like he gave 1 elven ring to a Vanya, 1 to a Noldo, and 1 to a
Vanya. Good luck with that.
I know. OMG Manway, I don't want your ring.
Get away from me with that ring.
Yeah.
Do you have a bracelet though? Oh man. Sorry. By the way,
light coming down off the mountain just shines off this bracelet. We're not going to say what the name of the mountain is.
It's got this really cool blue glow.
Yeah.
From Manway's clothing.
Yeah.
I did want to just point out, by the way, that the 7 rings for the dwarves and the 9 men, or the 9 rings for the men, those are the 7 and the 9, not 7 of 9 from Star Trek. I just want to make sure we get that this is not Jerry Ryan we're talking about in a skin suit.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, just be real clear. Just wanted to throw that out there because everybody needs an image of Jerry Ryan in a skin suit in their mind.
Jerry Ryan was not a gift of Sauron to men.
She might have been.
Oh man.
With all the corrupting effects thereof, but so I did find it's interesting that the elves' rings. We talked earlier about the possession of the elven rings that could keep off the decay of time. We talked about again Sauron finding the weakness of each of the races. Mm-hmm. These go directly to the weakness of the dwarves, which is greed,
material wealth.
Greed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like it's as if Morden from Babylon 5 came right up to him and said, "What do you want?"
Oh man, that's a good.
Remember that one?
I do. I was just about to show you that I remembered it. I'd like to live just long enough to be there when they cut off your head and stick it on a pike as a warning to the next 10 generations that some favors come with too high a price. I would look up at your lifeless eyes and wave like this. You're seeing me wave. This isn't on video. Can you and your associates arrange this for me, Mr. Morgan?
That would work so much better in video with you.
Wouldn't it with me
Veer hair? Centauri
please
hair.
Don't give me Veer hair. I mean, if I'm going to have Centauri hair, can I at least have Londo hair? Or Rifa. Lord Rifa. I liked his hair better.
That's too funny. I know you had that quote prepared.
I did. I cannot lie.
Because I had it too. I had it here too. So,
that's phenomenal.
We're right there with each other.
Yeah, that's such a memorable line from the show.
Oh yeah,
and I really didn't have to do a lot of. I pretty much had remembered it off the top of my head.
Yeah, of course, yeah, exactly.
But I had to make sure I got it right. I couldn't remember if it was just the next generation or the next 10 generations.
Right. You can be forgiven for maybe forgetting some of those details.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Very
sadly.
well done.
I do love that show.
Very well done.
Boy, I missed that.
Way too long for me.
We needed a Bab 5 reference, and it's been way too long since I've watched the show.
Yeah,
folks, maybe after we finish our Lord of the Rings and Unfinished Tales in 2022, maybe we'll do a Bab 5 podcast.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
We'll be very old then.
Yes, we will.
But yeah, that could be fun.
Yes, we will.
Anyway, now we really digress.
Yeah.
Now I've tempted you with some tremendous thing.
Now I'm like,
Ooh,
how can we make this happen?
Yeah, like we have time. We want to go weekly with this, right? And now we want to...
Yeah, right, yeah.
No.
Meanwhile, there's about 9 people out there listening saying, yeah, I would love to hear these guys talk about Babylon 5.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's like, no, thank you.
No, thank you.
Bab what? Bab what?
Yep. Anyway, what do we got?
What's his name from Big Bang Theory doesn't want to hear anything about Babylon 5. I never understood his dislike for it. Leonard, no. Yeah, Sheldon or
I've
Leonard.
never
Sheldon.
seen that show.
Sheldon Cooper. Sheldon Cooper, for some reason, just has it out for Babylon 5.
There's a... have you ever seen the show Spaced, the English show? Simon Pegg?
I have not, but Simon Pegg certainly is a funny man.
Yeah, we were just talking about Simon Pegg recently, weren't we?
I think we were.
Yeah, there's a show he did called Spaced in the late 90s, and there's a Babylon 5 reference in one episode of that. I can't say it here because this is a family podcast. But
if it's a Simon Pegg show, you know it's not clean.
Right. It was not a friendly comment about Babylon 5. Let's just put it that way.
Well, anybody who watched the first season could be forgiven for making unkind comments about the show.
Very true. But man, that second season, it picks up and
it sure doesn't. Never lets go after that.
No.
But yeah, I mean,
we digress.
We do. We really do. But it really is a lot like that. I mean, in the show, for those of you who never watched Bab 5, Morden represents this force that is able to really make things happen. Whatever you want to have happen, they can make it happen. But boy, there is a price, and the price is extraordinarily high. And here, that's the same thing. That's what happens with the dwarves, and it's what we're about to see with men, who it's the same thing. It's as though Morden has gone to them and say, what do you want? Because this is what they get. I'm going to read that next paragraph.
Okay.
Men proved easier to ensnare. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. They had, as it seemed, unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk, if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in worlds invisible to mortal men. But too often they beheld only the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. And one by one, sooner or later, according to their native strength and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning, they fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore and under the domination of the one, which was Sauron's. And they became forever invisible, save to him that wore the ruling ring, and they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgul were they, the ring-wraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. Don't invite one to your Christmas party. No,
do not. They'll mess up the place.
They really will.
This is the first time that we see a reference to any kind of invisibility.
Camul wearing a lampshade was pretty funny.
That's true.
You have to admit. No.
This is what we do at all the parties, Becky.
It really... I thought it was interesting. I don't think I'd caught this until this read-through, that when they were in that shadow world, they beheld the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. Remember when he snared Gorlim the Unhappy? It was a phantom.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Of his wife, his late wife.
That's interesting.
That's what Sauron can do. He's a master of phantoms.
Yeah. He's an illusionist. A shapeshifter and an illusionist, yeah.
Yeah, really amazing.
Wow. Very interesting. Yeah, no, I was just noticing this is the first time we see any kind of invisibility.
Yes.
And of course we know this from Lord of the Rings that the Nazgul have this, but I think it's interesting. We talked about how, hobbits tend to turn invisible when they put on the ruling ring. And here it seems, men were the only ones to turn invisible when they put on their rings of power as well. I wonder if it's because of the kinship of hobbits and men. I don't know. That's
an interesting point, because certainly the elves don't turn invisible when they put on their 3.
Right.
And there's no evidence that the dwarves do.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and the dwarves couldn't because they couldn't be turned to shadows. So
that's true. Yeah, there you go. So really it's just a manish thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably something to do with the nature of the Fëanor.
Yeah, probably. But you're right about, going straight for the power right?
Yeah.
You know, it's they became kings and sorcerers and warriors of old. Notice that it says that they became mighty in their day. So I think it's pretty clear to me that the rings are what, made them so.
I mean, they might have been in positions to begin with.
Oh, sure, yeah, they probably had some sort of positions of lordship,
Right.
before.
I mean, I doubt
in fact-
Sauron was handing these out under freeway overpasses. Handing them
Probably
to the the homeless guy with a bottle of Thunderbird. Hey, you want a ring? Sorry,
I hope not.
I am in a rare mood tonight. Apparently,
Good, it's good. Keep it going. I won't stop you now.
No.
But actually, we had a question sort of about this from one of our listeners, Andy,
okay.
who said, well, the elven rings were given to the 3 senior elves. The dwarven rings maybe were given to the 7 heads of the dwarf clans. Why were the 9 given to ordinary men rather than to, say, the king of Numenor?
Well, that's an interesting question.
It is, yeah.
I think we have to see first off that they weren't given to the 3 senior elves. I mean, Celebrimbor took those 3 and said, "We got to do something with these."
True, that is true.
And they, distributed them. They were the
probably
ones themselves who decided.
They
where
probably
should go.
were the 3 that were making the decision, so they just said, "Okay, let's just get rid of them quickly."
And it was exactly that. It was all about spreading them out.
Yeah.
Send to
It wasn't
Lindon,
as though it
which
was
is
a
very
gift
far away.
to the. It wasn't as like it was a gift to the. It wasn't swag.
It wasn't
powerful,
swag. Sauron didn't just send it on over. Hey, we think you're really cool. Would you wear this for us the next time you're on TV?
Right. And we talked about the fact that maybe we don't really know for sure that the dwarven rings were given to those 7 kings.
It's a reasonable assumption.
It's probably
It is
reasonable.
just an assumption. But the 9 were given to lords. They weren't given to quite ordinary men. And in fact, 3 were given to great lords of Numenorean race. And that probably includes the head of them all, the Witch King himself.
Right.
And we know that the second in command was the only one who was ever named, Camul, and he was an Easterling, so probably a chieftain or warlord of some kind.
And that's in Unfinished Tales, isn't it?
Camul? Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe it is. I mean, I know it's there. I'm not sure if it's anyplace else. I was just actually reading that of the Hunt for the Ring.
Okay, yeah.
And that's where you find out that he's also the number 2 in command.
Right.
He was actually up at Barad-dûr while the Witch King himself was in Minas.
It was in Angmar, right? Oh, it was in okay.
Minas Morgul when they all left to start hunting things.
Oh,
down.
that's right. Okay, yeah.
He and one other, while the other 7 were down in Minas Morgul.
Okay.
So he was probably a chieftain or warlord. I would imagine that all of them were some kind of position of authority, even if they weren't necessarily the king or the warlord. They were a rival. In fact, it almost makes more sense that they were, rivals. That they were maybe like the next guy down the totem pole, because that sort of ambition.
Because that's the person who wants more power, isn't it? Yeah, somebody who's in enough of a position to do something with the power, but
not already.
You go to the
spot.
high king of any tribe or anything. They've already got it. What do they want?
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose,
I will tell him
more,
but I don't think he'll be very interested. He won't be very keen. He
already
has
got one, you see.
So he found targets in men who had power but who wanted more power.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But he does ask an interesting question. Why not the king of Numenor, the king? Realistically, Sauron just didn't have influence there yet. It was a long ways away. We know that Numenor was closer to Valinor than it was to Middle-earth. Sauron wasn't exactly known as a great mariner. But, so he didn't have any influence there. And as we saw last chapter, frankly, he didn't have to turn Ar-Pharazôn into a ring wraith to accomplish his goals.
That's true, Ar-Pharazôn was corruptible enough. Yeah.
When wearing the One Ring especially, Sauron had the ability to, really to manipulate whomever, whatever man he wanted to.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. No, that is really interesting. I think that's very, very likely exactly how it played out. So not exactly ordinary men, but men with something to strive for.
Right.
And that's exactly the lure of those rings. So I guess with all that said, so what do we think actually happened to them? I mean, to me, it seems like, the corruption that we see with them, I think, so we've got this idea that they saw these phantoms that were given to them by Sauron. To me, I'm going back to that essay we read recently about Aman and Mortal Men, this sort of desyncing of the Hroa and the Fea when one would be given, long life. I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on too.
Certainly, that the spirit and the body sort of separate in a way.
Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
not in harmony anymore. I think.
no, I mean the body's
harmony
certainly
is
not even in this dimension. I mean, it's
Right.
they're invisible
Right.
to everybody else. That's bizarre.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and they just become shadows. It.
Yeah.
We'll probably talk more about the Nazgul maybe when we do get to Fellowship. I think we'll have to really dive into kind of their nature, but for now we'll just keep moving on because otherwise we're going to be here until tomorrow.
Forever.
Again, next little section here we're not going to read. We're just going to talk about that Sauron is in charge. This is not Charles in charge. This is Sauron in charge.
Wow. Now I got that song in my head. Thank you.
There's an earworm for you.
Yeah.
So he named himself, just like his old boss, Lord of the Earth, right? You know,
Oh,
I named
that's a
this
classic.
unto myself and that unto
That's
myself.
a classic.
But the elves refer to this time as the Black Years or the Days of Flight. But there is a break in this onslaught, really, of Sauron just overtaking everything. Because
Right.
you've got these tiny little retreats, right? You've got the Havens, and you've got Imladris, and that's just about it.
Yeah.
You know, so but eventually
It's kind of again like Valerian was towards the end of the First Age,
Yeah.
where there's just a
Yeah, just a
it's just
few little
overrun, and
outposts.
there's just a few little oases.
Exactly. This is you know, you can't stop him. There's nothing you can
Yeah.
do. He's just eating up the entire free world.
Yeah.
But he can't take Numenor yet. You know, he doesn't really have the ability to project power. You know, he doesn't have a naval force. But there is eventually a stay in this onslaught, as the text says, because Numenor came to him, and he ended up going back, like we saw in the Akalabath. So he's gone for a while. Interestingly, and we're not reading it, but this idea that he went down into the abyss, so his body was destroyed and his spirit came back. He was a little bummed that Wally was gone. Gil-galad had gotten a little more power. I mean, he's like, wait a minute, what? So, you leave for a few minutes.
I was sick for 1 week, and Gil-galad got elected class president.
Oh, good stuff. So he gets back home to Barad-dûr, where we learn before that he took up again his One Ring, and that he meditated war, which is just a dark thought.
Yeah. What? Yeah.
I meditated on war today. I just sat and thought war.
Just thinking war. Just
Instead of, oh,
good. Right.
it's
Yeah.
war.
Just war.
War.
That's gruesome.
What is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
In his case, absolutely everything.
Absolutely
Take over
everything
the
for
whole
him.
world.
Very, very true.
Sauron, I can just see, Camul asking him, "Gee, Brian, what are we going to do tonight?" Same thing we do every night,
We do
Camul.
everything, Camul.
Try to
Try to
take over the
Middle-earth.
world.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I really am. Yeah,
If Sauron had been a mouse, things would have been so
very
much easier.
large ears
Very large.
and a really dumb sidekick, a brilliantly
Yeah.
dumb sidekick. Yeah, I don't know that we'll ever probably get another Pinky and the Brain reference in on this show, but that was a brilliant little cartoon.
Challenge accepted. For a way. Oh, man.
I will wait to see how you succeed at that.
Gothmog, are you pondering what I'm pondering? I think so, Sauron.
Oh, goodness. Good stuff. So we get... I can't hardly think now.
Well, I think I've got the next passage, don't I?
I think you do, and please take it while I'll try not to laugh out loud while you're reading.
There's a little paragraph of just summarizing the Akalabath, which we just read, and I'll just read what happens
because it talks about where they're at and kind of establishes their realms. Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Elendil was cast up by the waves in the land of Lindon, and he was befriended by Gil-galad. Thence he passed up the river Llyn, and beyond Ered Luin he established his realm, and his people dwelt in many places in Eriador, about the courses of the Llyn and the Baranduin. But his chief city was at Anuminas, beside the water of Lake Nenuiel. At Fornost upon the North Downs also the Númenóreans dwelt, and in Cardolan, and in the hills of Hrudar. And towers they raised upon Aemon Berid, and upon Amon Sul. And there remain many barrows and ruined works in those places.
Mm-hmm.
But the towers of Aemon Berid still look towards the sea. Isildur and Anarion were borne away southwards, and at the last they brought their ships up the great river Anduin, that flows out of Rovanion into the western sea in the bay of Belfalas. And they established a realm in those lands that were after called Gondor, whereas the northern kingdom was named Arnor.
Very good. So we get the establishment of the realms in exile. We won't read the rest of that paragraph, but we get a lot of the little places and big places.
Some of the big locations.
Oh yeah,
the capitals.
We're all familiar with things like Osgiliath and Minas Ithil and Minas Anor and
Orthanc and
Orthanc.
Numinos is mentioned a few times in Lord of the Rings, but it's fallen, of course, so we never see it. But that was the northern capital.
Yeah.
We also get quick little mentions of some of their great works, right? The Argonath, the Glittering Caves, the Stone of Erech.
Yeah,
the
things
Orthanc
that we'll
itself,
see again.
Yeah, the pinnacle of Orthanc itself, which was one of those cool works.
That makes me think of what was the word you used last time from Beowulf?
The Enta Gewerk.
Gewerk. Yeah.
Enta Gewerk. The work of giants.
Yeah. That's Orthanc for you right there.
Yeah, well, and in fact, the word Orthanc actually comes from that. One of the phrases used in Old English poetry was Orthanc Enta Gewerk, the cunning work of giants, I believe.
Oh, that's right, cunning. Yeah.
Yeah, so that word Orthanc actually comes from that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And next up, what did they bring with them? You can only take a few things. The island is sinking into the ocean, so make sure your bags are packed.
Got to move quickly. What can you get?
You do. Many treasures and great heirlooms of virtue and wonder the exiles had brought from Númenor, and of these the most renowned were the 7 stones and the white tree. The white tree was grown from the fruit of Nimloth the Fair that stood in the courts of the king at Armenelos in Númenor, ere Sauron burned it. And Nimloth was in its turn descended from the tree of Tirion. That was an image of the eldest of trees, white Tilperion, which Yavanna caused to grow in the land of the Valar. The tree, memorial of the Eldar and of the light of Valinor, was planted in Minas Ithil before the house of Isildur, since he it was that had saved the fruit from destruction. But the stones were divided. 3 Elendil took, and his sons each 2. Those of Elendil were set in towers upon Emin Berid, and upon Amon Sul, and in the city of Anumnus. I'm sorry. You're going to have to help me with this one, Shawn. I always get the stress on the wrong syllable on this word.
Anuminas?
Anuminous. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought it was, maybe I was getting it wrong.
It's the anti-penult in this case.
It is, Anuminous. But those of his sons were at Minas Ithil and Minas Anor, and at Orthanc and in Osgiliath. Now these stones had this virtue that those who looked therein might perceive in them things far off, whether in place or in time. For the most part they revealed only things near to another kindred stone, for the stones each called to each. But those who possessed great strength of will and of mind might learn to direct their gaze whither they would. Thus the Númenóreans were aware of many things that their enemies wished to conceal, and little escaped their vigilance in the days of their might. Oh my. Well, I think we'll probably, since we're already kind of running short on time, is maybe we'll only talk a little bit about the stones. But do you have some things to say about the trees line of descent, right?
Well, just mainly just I wanted to. I think we talked about it a little bit last time, and we've talked about it before. I just think it's interesting that at this point the tree's actually planted in Minas Ithil, which becomes Minas Morgul. It's moved to Minas Anor later.
Yep. This tree is moving around a lot.
It really, yeah.
Really.
Yeah, this tree of the trees, the family tree of the trees, is long and storied.
It really is.
Just an interesting thing. We think of the one in Minas Tirith as coming from the west, but it really was a seedling of the one that was planted at Ithil ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really all I wanted to point out about that.
Okay.
I think we've gone into pretty good detail about the tree's line of descent in previous episodes.
Yeah, we've done it, I think, a couple times.
Yeah.
Now the stones are new.
I would like to talk a little bit about the stones.
Yeah,
for
we
sure.
need to. We need to a little bit. We probably can't talk quite as much about it as we'd hoped. But yeah, tell us a little bit about where they went. Let's recap those again.
Yep. So there's 7 of them. 3 of them went to Arnor. So there's one in Aemon Baride, which we know later as Tower Hills.
Okay.
Near the Shire. 1 went to Amon Sul, which we know better as Weathertop.
Weathertop.
Yeah. And then 1 goes to Anúminas, which was Elendil's capital in the north.
And that's north of, so the north-south road that goes through Bree, you keep taking that north, and you end up in Fornost. And that's
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. I don't have the map in front of me, but yeah, so that's those 3 that are in the north. And then there's 4 in Gondor. So there's 1 in Minas Ithil, which became Minas Morgul. And of course, that's the stone that ended up in Sauron's hands in Barad-dûr.
Right.
There's 1 in Minas Anor, which became Minas Tirith. So that's Denethor's stone.
Mm-hmm.
There's 1 in Orthanc, which becomes the one that Sauron looks into and that Pippin ultimately looks into later.
And Aragorn.
And Aragorn. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then there's 1 in Osgiliath, which ends up being lost.
Yeah.
So
if you
really
want to
interesting,
research, it really is. And if you want to study a little bit more about the Palantiri, I highly recommend reading that section in Unfinished Tales. That book is worth getting just for the background information you can get on the Palantir and on the Astari. I mean, there's so much really cool backstory there that answers so many of those questions that people have. But let's take a look real quick at some of those bits and pieces or quotes from Unfinished Tales. First, we need to learn that the stones, as Tolkien says, were originally innocent, serving no evil purpose. It was Sauron who made them sinister and instruments of domination and deceit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they were designed for surveillance, basically. They were, you know, they were
close
just
to
a tool.
TV cameras, you know.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And they really were, as we'll get to in terms of like what their powers were. But
yeah, absolutely.
But what did they look like?
Yeah, so they were perfect spears, and they appeared at rest to be made of solid glass or crystal deep black in hue. Okay. I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
Sure.
The smallest ones were about 1 foot in diameter, but some of the main stones, like for sure we know the one in Osgiliath and the one in Amon Sul, were larger. They were actually big enough that they couldn't be lifted by one man.
Oh my!
Yeah, and they were in custom tables.
Yeah,
they were, and they were
Did
really,
they order
really
those from IKEA?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, probably.
And
it's a good thing because they were unbreakable. So even if they broke through those IKEA tables, they wouldn't break. They were really, really sturdy. I mean, they thought that some thought that maybe the heats of Mount Doom might be enough to destroy them, but I don't think anybody ever actually put that to the test.
No. That's
what was interesting. Yeah, I mean, what was really interesting to me, though, in the Unfinished Tales was just how they worked. I think.
Well, yeah, they worked. It was all about line of sight, wasn't it? I mean, if you were looking through the stone and you wanted to see, let's say you were on Weathertop, and you wanted to see what was to the west of the stone on the Tower Hills, you would have to be standing to the east of the stone, looking west.
Looking through it
exactly.
West, yeah.
And as you moved around, your view moved.
Right.
So
it was like a 360-degree telescope.
It was like VR, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like putting on the goggles, except that you've got it through this thing. But you would only see. It's just fascinating how they work in that regard.
Well, and then so they would put them up in high places, right?
Right.
So because line of sight was important, and they only saw. There's no sound.
Yeah.
There's no,
So if you wanted to say something, you'd have to like write it out on a piece of paper and hold it in front of the stone.
Yeah. Or kind of look in someone's eyes, kind of as Pippin did in Sauron.
That's true. Because they could
look in someone's eyes and start. Right. They could transmit thoughts if they were looking at each other.
Willing. Yeah.
Right. So it's just really fascinating stuff about the way they worked and how they were made. Well, not how they were made, but what they looked like.
We don't know exactly how they were made.
Right.
I do wish we could spend more time on them, and I'm sorry, folks, that we have such a short time to spend, but we are rapidly approaching 2 hours, and we want to try to keep this reasonable.
Yeah. But again, check out the Unfinished Tales.
Please
There's a few pages about them.
Please do. And I'm sure we will revisit this in The Lord of the Rings. It's just, it's going to be a while before we get to the Two Towers.
We will see a Palantir again.
Yeah, you think? Yeah. We won't see it in The Hobbit, though, so it'll be a while.
No, it's true.
Well, next up, we've got a little bit of reading for you to do.
Okay.
We're going to skip a bit here just to let everybody know.
Yep.
We're moving
Yeah,
forward.
and the good news is we're getting into stuff that people have heard before.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of this is in the prologue. This is
Oh,
all
yeah.
more, So I'm speaking of Sauron here.
Mm-hmm.
There now he brooded in the dark, until he had wrought for himself a new shape, and it was terrible, for his fair semblance had departed forever when he was cast into the abyss at the drowning of Numenor. He took up again the great ring and clothed himself in power. And the malice of the eye of Sauron few even of the great among elves and men could endure. Now Sauron prepared war against the Eldar and the men of Westernesse, and the fires of the mountain were awakened again. Wherefore, seeing the smoke of Orodruin from afar, and perceiving that Sauron had returned, the Númenóreans named that mountain anew Amon Amarth, which is Mount Doom. And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Númenor. For in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in that land, the hearts of well nigh all its people had been turned towards darkness. Therefore many of those who sailed east in that time and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts were already bent to his will, and they served him still gladly in Middle-earth.
Wow. I mean, their land gets destroyed because of him.
And they still serve him.
They can't go home, but they still serve him.
Well, because in their stories they spin it as being the Valar or Ilúvatar.
Right. That jerk.
Right.
I mean,
right.
We deserved eternal life.
Yeah. What's wrong with that guy?
Now, before we get too far into this or move on any further, I want to catch something at the very beginning of your section there. There now he brooded in the dark. Can we just do a quick survey of brooding in the Silmarillion?
Never, ever a good thing in the Silmarillion.
There really aren't very many appearances of the word. We get that Melkor brooded in the outer darkness, because that's what he does. Then Feanor brooded in the dark. Then we get that Ar-Pharazôn brooded darkly, thinking of war, and now we get Sauron brooding in the dark.
Yeah.
So that's really nice company you're keeping there, Feanor. I mean, seriously, Melkor, Ar-Pharazôn, and Sauron. Yeah,
seriously, it is. I mean, really,
brooding
what
in
is
the
it?
dark is not good.
No. Yeah, brooding bad guys.
Brooding.
What is it with the brooding bad guys?
Seriously.
Sure, I'll be asking my daughter that question someday.
I hope not. Oh, man. Well, you live in Texas, so all you need to do is just, pump that shotgun.
Pump the shotgun, and there you go.
Be back by 10.
Why don't you bring him home to meet Daddy, sweetheart?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, goodness. Yeah. So we get the renaming of Mount Doom. That's iconic.
Amon Amarth, yep.
Yeah. Which is another, I was going to say that's a great name for a band, but it actually is a band.
It actually is the name of a band. That's true.
Ding, ding. For the first time, I think, we've actually caught the name of a real band.
Yep, that's true.
And you've got some word nerdery here, right? Some words I think you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, well, you talked about some of these Black Númenóreans, and we actually have two of them that are named.
Oh, yeah.
Interestingly, just these two names that just kind of come out of nowhere. Herumor and Fuanur. Who rose to power among the Haradrim. So they were men of Númenórean race. I mean, they have Quenya names.
Right.
Herumor is Black Lord, and Fuanur is Deep Shadow or Shadow Servant, something like that.
Wow.
And these are bad guys with names
these
like
are
that. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Black Lord.
Right. Yeah. I know.
Goodness.
And presumably their parents gave them these names. Yeah. It's not like Morgoth, the Black Foe, that was.
They lack subtlety.
Yeah. So it's just these are Black Númenóreans who rose to power as rulers among the Haradrim. It's an interesting parallel of the Noldor moving east and ruling over Nandor.
No, it is, isn't it?
Funny way my mind works. I thought of that comparison. It's just kind of like an evil version of that.
Yeah.
We don't get anything else about these guys, unfortunately, but presumably they were they were chieftains of the Haradrim. Probably some of the ones we saw in Lord of the Rings were descended from them.
Yeah, presumably. We're not going to read this next little bit, but Sauron attacks, and he takes Minas Ithil, destroys the White Tree. I'm sure he was like, this stupid tree again?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought I burned this thing.
What is it with you guys in this tree? It's a tree. Come on.
For crying out loud, it
what
is
do you want with this tree?
What is your deal?
Did you smell how it reeked when we burned it? Come on, man. Why do you want this thing?
Did you name this after your grandmother?
After your grandmother?
So then we get the famous Last Alliance, and I'm going to go ahead and read this very long passage, and I'm sorry that it's long, but it's well worth reading.
It's worth it, yeah.
Now Elendil and Gil-galad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one if they did not unite against him. Therefore they made that league which is called the Last Alliance, and they marched east into Middle-earth, gathering a great host of elves and men, and they halted for a while at Imladris. It is said that the host that was there assembled was fairer and more splendid in arms than any that has since been seen in Middle-earth, and none greater has been mustered since the host of the Valar went against Thangorodrim. From Imladris they crossed the Misty Mountains by many passes, and marched down the river Anduin, and so came at last upon the host of Sauron on Dagorlad, the battle plain, which lies before the gate of the Black Land. All living things were divided in that day, and some of every kind, even of beasts and birds, were found in either host, save the elves only. They alone were undivided and followed Gil-galad. Of the dwarves few fought upon either side, but the kindred of Durin of Moria fought against Sauron. The host of Gil-galad and Elendil had the victory, for the might of the elves was still great in those days, and the Númenóreans were strong and tall, and terrible in their wrath. Against Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad, none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil. Then Gil-galad and Elendil passed into Mordor and encompassed the stronghold of Sauron, and they laid siege to it for 7 years, and suffered grievous loss by fire and by the darts and bolts of the enemy, and Sauron sent many sorties against them. There in the valley of Gorgoroth, Anarion, son of Elendil, was slain, and many others. But at the last the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain, and the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and took it for his own. Then Sauron was for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places, and he took no visible shape again for many long years.
Wow.
Man, all I can see is, well, I know that the films...
I know.
There are some times where I don't like that the films have given me an image and that all I can see is that image. But in this case, I'm okay with it.
I have to say the prologue is pretty cool. I love seeing all the elves lined up for battle.
And the shore music at that point is spectacular.
The shore music is really good.
Really good at that moment.
We don't see much of Gil-galad at that.
No, very little.
I think
we see
him kill one guy, right?
Yep,
we see a little spear action.
Mm-hmm.
But we see Elendil.
Mm-hmm.
We see Isildur.
Yeah.
It's a cool scene. It's a great scene. I'll give it that. Yeah. Fellowship of the Ring is the best one of those 6 movies, I have to say.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Each one is just slightly less than the previous one. Well,
yep.
Okay. There's a big jump between 3 and 4, but we'll get to that in a few episodes when we talk about the films. Again, we get this recognition of the need for unity, teamwork. Yep. Yay! We've seen teams. This is the kind of the pinnacle of that in terms of men and elves. I mean, we've seen it before with elves and Valar. We've seen it with all these different. We've seen it among the Valar. Mm-hmm. So very, very important.
And the sad thing, well, we'll get this next time, but the sad thing is, they call it the Last Alliance for a reason.
Yeah,
that's true. It doesn't happen again, which is sad.
Yeah, I don't think they called it the Last Alliance at the time.
Probably not, no.
Let's call this the Last Alliance, because after this, we're done. We're done.
Yeah, right.
I'll help you this time.
Unless they were being cocky and they just thought that this would be the last time they'd have to fight a Dark Lord.
That may be true. But maybe they thought, this is the Last Alliance, because, then we'll finally get rid of evil forever.
Yeah, yeah.
Greatest host since the host of the Valar 3,500 years ago. My goodness.
That's a
long time.
Mm-hmm.
And none greater except for that one.
Yeah.
Sad that all living things fought on both sides except for elves. There were dwarves on that side. Of course, we know there were men, but even beasts and birds.
Well, yeah, we see that. I mean, we see
wolves and And
yeah,
bats
see wolves, Sauron and his elephants. I mean, we
Hannibal,
see,
yeah.
yeah, right, yeah, yeah, we see all this stuff.
The Mumakil.
So it shouldn't surprise. But what I think is really telling is the fact that only the elves were not divided.
They're the only ones who fought.
It kind of shows how far elves are above every other living thing on Arda.
They're not ever are they deluded into thinking that Sauron is the side they should fight on.
Right.
I mean, even a bad guy like Fëanor, the closest you get is Maiglin, right? He's the closest one, and he does, of course, actually fight on the side of Morgoth during the attack on Gondolin.
Yeah, by the end, yeah.
But other than him, there's not a single elf who ever fights with Sauron. Now, they do some stupid things. They kill each other. You know, Morgoth was like, hey, I don't have to fight you. You can kill each other. But at least in this case, the elves knew better. They fought only against him.
Yep.
So
cool
names of the weapons. Aiglas, which
Gil-galad, Aiglas.
Oh man.
Aiglas means icicle or snow. I think it's literally snow point, but it basically means icicle. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And of course, Narsil. We know Narsil very well.
I'm just thinking it's like spear of piercing cold +2 is Aiglas, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, Narsil, the flame, right?
I like that it actually says it's shown with the light of the sun and the moon, because the name Narsil is reminiscent of Anar and Isil, the names of the sun and the moon.
Absolutely.
But it basically means something like, red flame and silver flame, something like that.
I knew it was flame. I knew that was in there somewhere.
Yeah. They're both words mean flame, but just different colors of flame. Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently the elves have lots of words for flame.
I guess so.
More words than
snow,
the Eskimos have for snow.
Yeah. 7 years of siege before Sauron came forth.
That's a long time.
7 years.
I mean, I guess compared to like the Siege of Angband, okay, maybe not that. But, still.
Well, that was less of a true siege. That was more
of a Cold War, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, they tried to encircle it, but they knew full well they didn't have it encircled.
That's true.
They knew the north was open.
That's true. This is a full siege, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a circle around Barad-dûr. I mean, it is a tower, so it's certainly, physically capable of being
encirclable.
Besieged. Yeah, it's encirclable, if you want to use that word. I don't think I want to use that word. But yeah, so when it finally, it gets so bad that Sauron himself comes out. Now, I guess that means he did have limited access to supplies. I mean, that's the only reason I can see for the siege becoming so serious that he comes out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like his old boss, he's kind of a coward.
Yeah.
So he ends up in combat, killing both Gil-galad and Elendil, but is himself thrown down. And as we've seen at the end of that prologue, Isildur cuts the ring and takes it, and we finally get to something that Peter Jackson has filmed.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Pretty amazing.
And how well he has.
And that particular stuff, yes. Well, that, believe it or not, wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, we thank you very much for joining us tonight.
And we ask that you join us again next time when we read the second half of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. And we finally... Thank you very much. And we finally I was hoping you would jump in with that.
Yeah.
And we finally come to the end of the Silmarillion.
Wow. And mostly talk about a lot of stuff you already know. But
pretty much, yeah.
We'll do it with our usual Prancing Pony Podcast flair, so please don't miss it.
Yep. And remember, if you're reading along and you like to take notes as much as we do, don't mark up your first edition hardcovers. No. Go to the official library tab on our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where you can find links to cheap paperbacks of Tolkien's works, as well as audiobooks, music CDs, and some other cool things for your Tolkien collection. And if you buy through those links, you'll be helping to support this show without costing you a penny more.
Absolutely. And you can support us also by leaving a review on iTunes. Please, we really do appreciate it. If you don't listen to us on iTunes, you can still leave a review there. As long as you have an Apple ID, just take a couple moments and do that. Some of you have said some really kind things there, and we are grateful.
Yes, we are. And if you haven't done so already, you may subscribe on iTunes or through whatever your favorite podcast app is. You can find our RSS feed on our website, or you can find us on Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, and most other podcast directories.
And a big thank you to those of you who are connecting with us on social media. We set out to start a conversation that everyone could join. That's why we called this The Prancing Pony. And it's why we have the online common room on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast and on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod. And just a reminder, we will be starting up that Patreon campaign by the time you're listening to this. So please check our website and social media channels for ways that you can support us and join in the adventure.
And remember that social media is a great place to share our podcast as well. So please retweet us, share us, and tell your friends.
That is really important. We can't ask you enough to please do that for us. And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or your predictions on what this Isildur guy is going to do with the ring to the Prancing Pony Podcast
I have no idea.
gmail.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, 2 hours and 10 minutes is still far too short a time to spend amongst such admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.